This is BBC 2W with an Oxford-Cambridge battle in University Challenge in half an hour after Terry Jones.
I'm about to embark on a very odd journey. I'll often be travelling on roads that don't exist in a world that is, quite frankly, baffling. I'm following the world's first road atlas, John Ogilby's Britannia of 1675. Ogilby's Atlas is a set of strip maps showing the roads of 17th century England and Wales. And I've set out to try and trace 4 of the roads in Wales to see what's happened to them, where and what they were then and what they are now. It turns out to be a bigger puzzle than I'd expected, because this isn't the innocent map it's being taken for. In it is hidden the blueprint for a revolution, which only emerged when I actually made the journeys.
I'll have to hand it to this particular programme. You actually seem to discover something new about history. The first road atlas of Britain has dirty political fingerprints all over it.
And on this road, dirty political footprints too. The roads I've been taking are not just hard to find, they're hard to understand.
I don't know where I am.
They were impassable to carriages, and some had fallen out of use, except by secret Catholic pilgrimages.
A number of Catholic priests were arrested, were killed absolutely horribly.
At last, I'm following a real, well-used road to Holyhead, the route to Ireland. But the atlas reveals it's not what it seems. John Ogilby knew it very well. In an earlier career, he had been master of the revels in Ireland and founded the first theatre in Dublin. And now, after the Restoration, he was master of the revels there again. And he knew the road to Dublin was horrible, by land and by sea. This is a model of the Royal Yacht Mary that carried royal officials from Holyhead to Ireland, including the master of the revels. It looks gorgeous, but according to Holyhead historian Les Jones, it was about as glamorous as economy air travel.
Very basic, very uncomfortable, very damp.
And liable to run aground and sink. That happened in the year when Ogilby's map was published.
The Mary, when she was lost in 1675, had 74 persons on board, 28 crew and 36 passengers.
On a 50, 60-foot boat?
Well, the Royal Yacht Mary was 56 foot long and 19-foot beam.
Well, they must have been all standing up or something.
Certainly crammed in, and of course you must remember that vessels in those days wouldn't have had a full headroom, so you couldn't stand up inside them. The Irish Sea is well known for a short, steep sea, which is uncomfortable in the crossing and dangerous as well.
But at least the journey across Wales should be safe enough. Ogilby's road enters Wales from Chester. I'm sure all those fortifications are just decorative. Inside the city, everything seems to have been rich and prosperous. They'd made a good recovery from the Civil War by 1675. This Welsh Gate, now mysteriously renamed Bridge Gate, was rebuilt in the 18th century. And it says very clearly, here is law, here is power. Those symbols carved below me, where all the Welsh could see, are obviously a warning, as well as an advertisement for the advantages of royal government. These scales of justice. We punish bad people. And that's the fasces, the symbol of Roman authority. A bundle of sticks, the population, bound tightly around an axe.
Well, speaking as a Welshman, I'm glad to be here in the present day when the law certainly isn't in the job of chopping off Welshmen's heads. Mind you, that's all ancient history, of course.
I'm sorry to trouble you, but did you say you were a Welshman?
Yes, I was born in North Wales, actually.
Oh, and you stayed in the city last night?
Yeah, great hotel, actually.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid the news is not good. You see, the difficulty is that in 1403, following the Battle of Shrewsbury, the king was rather concerned about the number of defections in North Wales, and therefore his son issued an order in the following terms. First of all Welshmen were to leave their arms here at the Welsh Gate. Secondly, there were to be no gatherings of more than 3 Welshmen at all. Thirdly, there was a curfew, and if any Welshman was found within the city walls after midnight, I'm afraid he was liable to execution.
But that's so that was a law in the early 15th century. I mean, it doesn't apply now.
Well, the order has certainly never been tested, but neither has it ever been formally rescinded.
All the time last night, I was at risk. I could have been arrested and had my head chopped off.
Theoretically, yes. Now, I don't know whether you want to stay another night and we could conduct a simple experiment.
Well, it's very, very kind of you, but I think I might be getting along, actually. Thanks a lot. Thanks.
I'm suddenly in quite a hurry to get on my way.
Of course, Chester was a port in its own right. And in the 17th century, it's where most people would take ship for Ireland. But not only was it a dangerous journey, like all sea journeys, it was infernally inconvenient and slow. It could take months. In the first place, the port was silting up, so you had to travel further and further to get on the ships as they started berthing further and further down into the estuary. And the boats themselves were pretty simple affairs that needed a following wind. So you had to wait for a southerly to get you out of the River Dee, and then you had to hope and pray for an easterly to blow you round the coast of North Wales and across the Irish Sea to Dublin. Dublin, here I come.
The other way.
And every extra hour at sea was another hour of seasickness and danger, which is why the wealthy allowed their baggage the privilege of the long voyage from Chester, while they went overland through North Wales and took the shorter passage from Holyhead, which is exactly where Ogilby's Road goes.
It goes from castle to castle. It must have been the most heavily fortified road in Britain. I've had the route traced onto an Ordnance Survey map that's loaded into this GPS. The blue line's the route, the red dot is me. And speaking now as a red dot, I'm very quickly at the first castle, pronounced Harden. This is the ruin of a Norman stronghold, called a bailey, on top of an artificial hill called a motte. Yes, motte and bailey. Isn't this programme instructive? But by the time Ogilby's surveyors got here around 1672, it looked pretty much like this. It had looked like this for 25 years. During the Civil War, Harden Castle was on the losing side. It stood out for the king. In fact, in 1645, Charles I was sheltered here.
When the parliamentarians took over the country, they blew the old castle up. It simply wasn't needed. Wales had long ago been completely subdued, and the castle was just an open invitation for royalist troublemakers. About 75 years later, the owner of the ruin built this romantic imitation castle to live in. And when the great Victorian Prime Minister, William Ewart Gladstone, married into the family, this became his home.
The modern road to Holyhead is the A55, but that's not the road Ogilby maps. When Charles I had passed through here, he was going from one royalist stronghold to another, and there were plenty of them.
Well, this is the main road to Ireland, the road that Charles I took all that time ago, but it seems to have lost a bit of status since those days. Now, according to Ogilby's map, we descend Skybow Haggin Hill, and then 4 furlongs further on, we ascend Laggin Haggin Hill. Wonderful names now lost to history. In fact, the road between here and Denbigh is full of great names, like Skiving and the mysterious Smell Mills. Now, alas, or perhaps fortunately, no more. Ah, I think this must be Laginhagen Hill.
At the time of Queen Elizabeth I, a court recorded that the main road to Denbigh was
foul and dangerous to be passed and travelled, that the subjects coming and riding weekly to market are in great danger, and their horses with bags and loads are daily there, by reason of the deepness of the mire and dirt, overthrown.
So the road Charles I had followed was unsuitable for heavy traffic. Odd that, he thought he could bring an army on it from Ireland. Of course, Ogilvy doesn't directly criticise that opinion. John Ogilvy was rather a strange figure. It's odd that a publisher and master of the revels in Ireland was given a royal commission to survey the whole of England and Wales. It was a project that demanded much more money than he could be expected to raise by himself. And the dedication to Britannia doesn't just talk about roads as useful for travellers.
Here, then, I present your sacred majesty with an important novelty, the scale of peace and war.
It seems to suggest that there's a hidden message in the atlas, speaking of pregnant hints of security and fainter, indigested representations, which are deducible to help with security against civil dissension and foreign invasion. And from that point of view, the message seems to be that, like Harden, Denbigh was useless.
Denbigh, seated on a branch of the Clwyd, once of great strength, with walls and a castle, lately demolished.
The castle was heavily restored in the Civil War, because it was another royalist stronghold. Charles I stayed here for 3 days when he was in serious trouble, and his forces were smashed here. There were 500 dead and injured. And eventually, in 1660, Parliament had the place knocked down. So, like Harden, Ogilvy's surveyors saw a ruin pretty much like this. The town used to be inside the castle walls, but by the time of that report, people had moved out and built the streets down below.
The town in Different Large is deemed the best in North Wales and has a good market for cattle, etc. on Wednesdays.
And this was one of the very few places in Wales where there was a regular postal service.
The British Post Office was set up in 1660, and from then on, Denbigh was a post town on the service to Holyhead. In the 1670s, there were 2 posts a week, and it cost 3d to send a letter. That's the equivalent of about £30 nowadays. That would help the post office break even. Postmasters were appointed in towns along the route, such as Harden and Denbigh here. They were paid 1 shilling and 8p a day to ensure that they always kept at least 3 horses available for the post. That's over twice what Ogilvy was paid as Cosmographer Royal for mapping the entire universe. But then he didn't have to keep changing horses. The cosmos was not nearly such a dangerous place for a galloping horse as the roads of North Wales. Wales was no longer at war with England, but this was bandit country. In 1688, it was described as the most heathenish country ever any man travelled. So postboys rode at the gallop and had to blow their horns 4 times a mile to show they were still alive.
In the front of Ogilvy's atlas, there's a list of all the post roads, including this one. The Postmaster General was obviously involved in this book. The job was held by Henry Bennet, Earl of Arlington, a man very proud of the war wound on his nose. He also happened to be running the government.
Arlington is the really effective minister of a bunch of crooks who've gone on in history as the Cabal, because that's a smart way of putting together the first letters of their name.
One 18th century historian spoke of the dark councils of the Cabal and said never was there a more dangerous ministry in England.
This is a government that's interested in grabbing power, and mapping out your country is a symbolic way of controlling it.
And this road was worth mapping if you were interested in control. It was a military road once, but those days seemed to be over. This is Conway, the castle that follows Denbigh. According to Ogilby's map, Conway was a large, well-built and fortified town in 1675. But the castle, like hundreds of others, had been rendered useless. It was repaired by the railway company in the 19th century to attract visitors.
Conway was the key to Ireland. Charles I had travelled here down our road. He was desperately trying to hold on to Conway because he was hoping to receive reinforcements from Ireland here. He didn't.
Charles I had been relying on the castles on the road as staging posts for his no-show army from Ireland. What Ogilby seems to be showing, perhaps as one of his pregnant hints, is that even if they'd landed at Holyhead, they'd have got completely bogged down on the road. Later generations got the point and acted on it.
If you'd been travelling on the road that Ogilby mapped, you'd have had to cross this estuary by ferry in order to get here to Conway. From up here, you can see the whole history of the road from Chester to Holyhead. Down there, you can see the spot where Ogilby's map marks the ferry that you took over to Conway from the Denbigh Road.
That's when you had to go on foot. There's the beautiful suspension bridge built by Telford in 1826. You could go by coach. And that's the railway bridge built by Robert Stevenson 22 years later. A box strong enough to hold a train. Faster, faster, but not fast enough. In 1958, another road bridge was built to carry a greater volume of motor traffic. And over on the other side, there's the newest road leading into a tunnel, 1991.
According to Ogilby, once you get past Conway, it all gets rather interesting. Ogilby says that if the tide's out, you simply walk straight out onto the sand. Well, this is where Ogilby's map has taken me. There's Anglesey in the distance over there, but in between is Penmanmawr, the great stony head. Penmanmawr was renowned in Ogilby's time as the most dangerous spot on the whole road to Holyhead.
Travellers dreaded this stretch. To traverse Penmanmawr, you had to go on
A path not only difficult but dangerous, the ascent being rough and steep, giving you a perpendicular precipice or declivity on the right to the sea and a kind of overhanging rock of as great a height on the left to the landward.
It's less impressive now because it's been cut away by mines and to make safer roads. But you get the point.
Actually, I'm not standing on Ogilby's road at the moment. Ogilby's drawn his road going right through the middle of the sea. Oh, he's not daft. That's because the only alternative to the dangerous crossing over Penmanmawr was to wait until low tide and to go out on the sands around Penmanmawr.
This isn't a walk to dry land, but to deep water and a ferry. The walk is more than 9 miles, and once you've started, you have at most 5 hours before the tide comes back and gets you. And that's what I was going to do, until we hit a snag.
We can't actually set off on Ogilby's road from the other side of Penmanmawr because I think the sands have changed. So we've actually come around Penmanmawr and we're just going to cut it short slightly and join up with Ogilby's road halfway across. Got Mike. Mike here is our geologist. What's happened to the sand?
You could actually walk across there, but we would encounter a river at some point, and it would make things a little bit more difficult. So we're going to cross further down.
Yeah, okay.
No problem.
Let's see what happens then.
So, having taken the modern road round the Great Stony Head, we'll join up with Ogilby's road out there on the mud. It's 3:30, We have to get our ferry by 6 o'clock or be caught in the rising tide.
What's the secret of walking in this?
Just don't maintain pressure in one place constantly for too long. Then it won't liquefy underneath your feet and you won't go down.
We are heading in the right direction, are we?
I think that's Beaumaris, yeah. Pretty confident that's Beaumaris.
Beaumaris is the last of the castles on the road. There was even some idea that Charles I should make it his capital, but of course that didn't happen.
Beaumaris, yeah.
All you've got to do is just walk, keep
just
walking.
Walk in a straight line.
And we're there.
But I can't imagine for 1 minute having to carry stuff across there. Nightmarish.
The Romans once took an army across here, but when the English tried in 1283, hundreds drowned. Maybe it was different in Roman times.
Yeah. We know that it was dry land at certain points in history.
Yeah.
And you've got plants and animal remains sort of buried beneath our feet as we're walking now.
So there'll be forests here?
Certainly, it would have been a marsh with trees such as birch and hazel and what have you.
You sure the tide's not coming in?
I think we've got a couple of hours yet.
It still looks quite a long way off.
We should pick up the pace, I think, just in case. It's not going to wait for us.
It's hard to credit that this is the main road to Ireland. You know, you've got to get out of your carriage or whatever. You've got to walk across this mud flat.
It would have been a well-travelled route, certainly, at that time, with a lot of traffic going backwards and forwards across the island.
I mean, what you think at this time of day, would there be quite a lot of other people doing it at the same time?
Certainly would, because this would have been presented with an ideal opportunity, a spring tide, in daylight, of course, because you do want to be travelling across here at night, very easy to get disorientated and lost.
It's just hard to imagine what a road was in 1675, you know. I mean, you have to sort of change your concept of
what a road is.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the ferry's too small for the whole team. Still, they can wait for the second trip. There should still be time. Most people used to ride to here, and the ferries were specially designed to pick up horses.
How did they get the horses on the boat?
Basically, once they got the horses to the side of the boat, the passengers would lift the front legs of the horse into the boat, and then they would just slap it and encourage it until it got into the boat itself.
But it was a pretty dangerous crossing, was it? I mean,
it was a very dangerous crossing if they picked the wrong state of the tide, or maybe the ferryman would be late.
The ferrymen waited in the tavern, and you did have to hope that they knew you were waiting for them, or you would be stuck, like the rest of our crew, with the water coming up. Fortunately, we had a real lifeboat on hand. Well, I think what that shows is that the idea of moving an army across here was clearly nonsensical. Baggage carts would have sunk, and the rear would have been drowned in the rising tide.
Mike, we made it.
I'm told that we're the first people to actually complete this crossing in the last 180 years. That road and ferry belong firmly in the past.
It's a past that ended here in 1826. Telford's new road to Holyhead was the biggest non-military engineering operation since the fall of Rome. His suspension bridge across the Menai Straits was 3 times the size of any the world had seen. And by golly, it saved a hell of a walk.
Actually, Telford's road was a military road, designed to solve the problem of getting armies to Ireland. It was just that it was such an enormous project that the war it was built for was long over by the time it was completed. When the road was commissioned, Britain was living under the constant threat of a French invasion. In fact, Napoleon had already twice tried to invade Ireland, and the Irish didn't seem to mind. In fact, they'd taken his side. This wasn't something that England could tolerate.
Dublin had to be brought much closer to London and the centralised power of government. That's what Telford's Road was designed to do. Roads were arteries of power, via which government could defend and control its territory. And back in the 17th century, that's precisely why Ogilvy said he'd mapped the roads in the first place.
For security against civil dissension and foreign invasion, as well as establishing a present greatness or laying foundations of a future glory.
And Holyhead today, at the end of the road, is, I suppose, where all that greatness and glory gets you. It's a big road now, but the atlas proves that this road was militarily useless in 1675. Who needed to know that? Not some simple traveller or gentleman with a library. What was John Ogilvy really doing? And whatever it was, why was it worth the equivalent of tens of millions in modern money?
And now we're coming to the end of the series. I think I'm beginning to understand the puzzle of Ogilvy's atlas. Why he chose roads to obscure places that just happen to have shrines and mines, as well as a road that leads from one castle to another. His book was a political document. In Ogilvy's day, King Charles didn't have much power over his realm. England wasn't like France, where Louis XIV had power and wealth, the Sun King. But Charles had been brought up in France, in exile.
And France was Catholic.
Catholicism is a language of smells, bells, pomp, hierarchy and obedience, and monarchs like all of those things. And it's no wonder that Charles himself says there's no religion in the world that matches the dignity of a king better than Catholicism.
Charles wanted the power his father had fought and died for, and he thought that becoming Catholic was part of that. Of course, that could provoke another civil war. But Louis XIV offered money and an invading army to back him. That was the secret Treaty of Dover.
The most scandalous bit of paper in English history is probably the secret Treaty of Dover, which Charles II signed with Louis XIV, 1670.
And that was the first reason why this atlas was needed, to help Charles bring in French troops and establish himself as an absolute Catholic ruler. And that's why looking at Wales has been so important.
A very good reason for looking at Wales is its back country. If you're going to land an invasion force, it has a nice broken coast on which to land.
Thanks to Ogilvy, Charles II knew he shouldn't make his father's mistake of trying to bring an army via Holyhead. Another road suggested a better harbour at Fishguard, which Ogilvy had pointedly said was good for ships, warships, and which Napoleon would use for his failed invasion. And the map contained a mass of useful information for running Charles II's Catholic absolute monarchy.
It's absolutely true, I think, that Ogilvy's working towards the centralisation of power. He's employed by people who are mapping out a greater potential for royal government in every field.
This is a real historical discovery. Ogilvy's map was part of a secret project to replace parliamentary government.
We always knew that around 1670, Charles II's government was trying to become a much stronger monarchy. Now you've given us the geographical dimension of that. It's a monarchy which is literally trying to map out its power on the land, so it can get a grip on its subjects by knowing exactly where to put its men when it wants them at any particular point.
Thanks. France was the land of reason, of fashion, and of centralised royal power. And Ogilvy's atlas, I think, was part of the programme to turn Charles into another Sun King and Britain into the image of France. Oh, coming. It was the map of a future that never happened.
The origins of St David's Cathedral in Pembrokeshire, Land of Dreams, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock here on BBC 2W. Next tonight, University Challenge.